So I thought I would do another vlog. I hate that word. It sounds like something you would do to somebody in a back alley. I flogged him, or I vlogged him. I guess flogging is a word. Anyway, I had in my mind I was going to sit and chat about some stuff that I wanted to get off my chest, but then I thought, sometimes just venting for venting's sake is kind of like, I think, really stupid and immature, but fuck it, I'll do it anyway. So, I've been thinking a lot about socially awkward moments, and it made me think, like, when I've had socially awkward moments living here, that it's kind of exemplified. I don't even know if that's a word or not. It's more pronounced because there's a layer of culture. I don't feel like I'm sitting up straight. A layer of culture to have to kind of go through. And so it's not like you haven't had, or like I haven't had these cultural weird moments with like American friends, but when I have them with Aussie friends, it's like you leave with this feeling of kind of like, did I say something that I shouldn't have said? Or did you take what I said just way too seriously? Anyway, interestingly, sometimes a lot of these have to do with food, and I think eating is obviously a universal, everyone eats. It's a human thing. And I think sometimes the way we approach eating in certain contexts means certain things to certain people, and then if you don't adhere to that kind of expectation, things can get kind of weird. When we first moved here, in the first year we lived here, we'd been here maybe probably just a few months, like maybe 3 months or so, because I remember it was, I think it was around October. In fact, I think it was Halloween. It was like around Halloween. Why I remember that, I have no idea. And we were eating out, and we were with a group of people, and I think that, we were probably kind of drunk, as usual. And, but not like obnoxious, you know what I mean. Just had been out drinking. And so we're at a restaurant, and when it comes time for the bill to be paid, we, I guess, needed to divide up the thing, which drives, I think, a lot of restaurants crazy here. But then I can't remember, maybe they do, anyway, I'm babbling, as usual. Just trying to remember back. I can't remember what it was, but I feel like everybody was splitting up the bill. And being the fact that neither David or I rarely, at this point we haven't learned that you really need to kind of have cash with you at all times, even though you can pretty much use an ATM card anywhere. It's just one of those things. It's like, if you just don't have cash on you, it just can, especially with your group of people trying to pay, it can get really weird for some reason. I haven't yet to really figure that out. But anyway, so when we went to pay, apparently David was paying for whatever the portion, and I guess something happened, like he typed in his wrong little pin or something, and it didn't, like, they had to do it again, and the woman that I guess was the owner got, like, for whatever reason got upset, and I think there was still the whole issue with, we could still barely half understand what people were saying around us, because our ears hadn't adjusted to, it's not so much the accent, it's just the rhythm of speech, of Aussie speak is like much different than American, British, or any other peoples that speak English. It's just everybody has their own rhythm and a certain way of communicating, and I don't know, it's like Americans gesticulate with their hands a lot and Australians don't, and it sets up these weird barriers when you're trying to communicate with people, and they kind of look at you like you're either crazy or you're just being too loud or you're just being too this, or everybody just falls into what their stereotype of what the other culture actually is. But anyway, suffice it to say that It did not end very pleasantly because apparently the woman made some comment to David like, well, in this country, this is how we do things, and it's just like, you know, an arrogant American kind of thing, even though I don't know that she said that completely, but it was sort of like that's what she was implying. And he's just trying to fall over nice, trying to like explain that he was actually just trying to pay and that he apologized for pushing in the wrong pin and blah, blah, blah. And one of the guys there ended up putting it on their card and then we paid them. But I think in the end that probably killed that friendship in any kind of, I mean, what I mean is not killed that friendship. I still see those guys around, but it's like, I think they probably, it fed into their whole way of looking. And of course this is assumptions on my part. I mean, you know, who knows, but I just know how I am in those kind of contexts. It's kind of like, yeah, it's like I don't really know these people very well, and if it's like if there's so much drama associated with them, then it's just like I don't want to like be around them. But then it was just like one of those slapstick kind of things that happens, and it just sort of fell apart. But anyway, later we just went out and had a good time. And so then other times that have been socially awkward for me was like, which I think I wrote about, is one time, this has been about a year and a half ago, I was on a bus back from Roselle back to the city, and I was just sitting on the bus waiting for my stop, and this guy was in front of me who had sat down in front of me at maybe got on at a different stop. And so my next stop was coming up, and I just sort of like moved, like I was the only person in the seat, so I like moved over to the side of the seat so I could easily just get up and go down the aisle and get off the bus. And when I like moved over, he's sitting in front of me, he kind of like glanced over and was like, and he kind of, you know, maybe mumbled something that I didn't really understand. And when I stood up, he kind of looked at me and he literally just bluntly said to me, he just said, fucking faggot. And I was like, and of course, I know any of my friends listening to this are just like laughing, going like, you know, what were you doing? Trying to pick him up or something? And it was like, I wasn't even doing anything. I was minding my own fucking business, you know? It's like, I didn't even know the guy actually existed. And so I was trying to think later, like, what was it that I had done to make him assume that I'm trying to pick him up? And on top of that, what about me physically screaming faggot, you know? It's kind of interesting. And I realized that I hadn't been called a faggot in a long time, like by non-fags. I mean, fags use the word faggot a lot, the way I think a lot of black people will call each other nigger and get away with it because they can, because it's okay for members of one group to call themselves that and identify as that, to own the word in the way that they choose to own it or discard it or whatever they want to do with those kind of terms. But it's not okay if you're not a member of that group and using it in a way that was originally meant for those words to be, and that's, you know, completely demeaning and derogatory and whatever, even though I'm not about, like, I'm not trying to squash speech. It's like the guy wants to call me a faggot and call me a faggot, and the fact that I think he's like, was probably like a fucking bogan asshole cunt, then that's, you know, my prerogative to do that too. But the thing is that I didn't know how to react to it, because had I been, let's say, back home, I would have just told the guy literally to just piss off and not even thought anything about the repercussions. And I think here, even though it would be very common for, if I had been an Aussie fag, to just say fuck off, but then it was like, I think it's just not knowing. And then you know that, you know, you go through this thing in your mind of like, well, you know, I'm here on a visa. I'm not from here. And you think of like, you want to avoid altercations with people because you realize that in some way, either aside from getting physically harmed, that you could be like kicked out of the country, and you're kind of like, well, that wouldn't go over really well, you know? So, I mean, you do think that way. And I think expats anywhere would like probably think that way a lot, of just sort of like, is it worth getting into a situation aside from the physical part of it? I know maybe other people are shocked that I'm not concerned about the physical part so much as I am my well-being of being able to stay and work in a place that I committed to stay and work in. And I think for me it was just the whole thing was just a jaw-dropping experience all the way around, and to this day, it still kind of eats at me because I've lived here long enough now. If somebody did that, my first reaction would be actually to punch them in the face, which I don't consider myself to be a violent person, but I know how to take care of myself, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's just weird. And so that sets up a whole other layer of kind of like, again, it's like, if I were back home, having those feelings are much different than having those feelings when you're somewhere else and you've got that layer of another culture to go through. It's like this other barrier to kind of like try to look at that situation and kind of understand how it's impacting your life. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense, but I think I sort of am making sense. And so not the last thing, and then sometimes it can have comedic effects that you're not prepared for. It was the other night, I was out with a group of people, and it came to where we're going to pay the bill. It was a dinner situation again, and so everybody is looking at their portion of the bill. But then it's noticed how expensive the actual bill actually is. And I've never thought about it because to me, everything here is so incredibly expensive. I mean, I don't think about it anymore, but when it comes to food, it's like a lot more expensive than it is in the US. And I know Australians get sick of hearing Americans say that, but it's true, you know, I mean, it's just the truth. And they know it. Most of them have traveled, or not most of the people that I've met here have traveled there. Or it definitely have been around enough Americans that it's just like I wouldn't say it anymore because I think it's just kind of rude because it's like, yeah, tell me something about my country that I don't already know kind of thing. So, sorry, I got sidetracked. So anyway, at the time we didn't realize had been overcharged for the wine, but it was kind of interesting because the conversation that ensued was literally like being back home because I'm so used to every time you go out and eat with a group of any group, gay, straight, southern, northeast, west coast, it's very typical when you're in a group more than 4 people apparently, that it's like once the bill comes, everybody sits and analyzes it and then starts bitching and complaining about how expensive everything is. And I'm kind of like, well, I mean, you saw what was on the menu before you ordered, so how can you not, like, do the math and for yourself personally? Like, again, it's a whole thing that I've never really understood. Even though, yes, I do have moments where I go like, oh my God, that's really expensive, but it just wasn't one of those moments for me at all. Like, it seemed completely appropriate until we realized, like I said, the wine thing. But I had in my head that we actually drank an extra bottle of wine, so in my mind it all made sense until it was looked at. But the thing that was really funny to me is that I just offhanded, jokingly said, oh my God, this is like being around a bunch of Americans. And when I said that, it was just sort of like, some people at the table got super defensive about it, or at least that's how it seemed to me. I mean, not that they were angry. I mean, don't get me wrong, and if they're listening to this, I don't want to overstate, my impression, but at the same time, I did take it to mean like, ooh, you've compared me to something that it's like I don't want to be compared to, and I think that I have experienced in other contexts outside of food things. It's like, it is an odd thing sometimes being American living here because sometimes I feel like it's just a parody of American culture. And I mean, I hate to say that, but it is. Some of it is. And I mean, I think a lot of people know that. But it kind of is like something that it's something that's known, but you just don't say it out loud. And that was one of those things. It's like being me. It's like, the thing I do appreciate about Aussie culture is Australians will, more often than not, will just tell you how they feel about something, and it's just done in a very just casual, matter-of-fact kind of way, which I totally appreciate that. But then when you try to like, and in some ways sometimes it can be joking too, like it's not done in a confrontational way, even though that happens too. But I'm just talking about just everyday interactions with people. But I've noticed sometimes if you try to dish it back, it can kind of get weird, and I've never really understood that. So I don't know, maybe one day an Aussie will explain to me like the faux pas of when it's okay to like be joking about their culture, but then when it's not okay, I don't know, anyway. You just kind of have to live here and understand what I'm talking about. And so finally, the last thing is, which interesting is another food story, is that we had another dinner episode that I don't really want to talk about because I don't want to imply anything beyond it's very awkward and it has put a bad taste in my mouth, but it was just, yeah, I'm not sure how to actually talk about it in an abstract general way other than someone was offended by the actions of another person and related to food distribution, and it was really weird, and it didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but apparently it is a big deal, and I don't know, and then some things were said, but then the things that were said were just sort of bouncing back off of other things that were said, and then it just gets blown up and blown out of proportion maybe, but I think the two people involved in it are probably not feeling that way, and then but the fact that I have to live with one of them and the other one I thought was a really good friend is kind of like, I don't know. So anyway, so I know that was really just, I kind of glossed over that. It's like I said, it's not something I feel comfortable discussing the intimate details about in a public format that this is for me. But let's just suffice to say that it's extremely awkward. And again, it's like going through that layer of culture that I'm not sure if that's a layer that I need to contend with or if it doesn't matter. But, and I can hear both of them in my head, kind of like chatting out what I'm saying. So anyway, it's sorry to bring it up and then not tell you exactly what it was all over, but it all seems so ridiculous in the end. And so it takes me back to the whole food thing. And so food can be a very I think it's interesting that food can be the vehicle for very socially awkward moments. And to me, they should be the least socially awkward. And then I have to think about like with the Easter holiday that just happened, like there's all this much ado about Easter, and it's like, quite frankly, I can never remember the difference between Easter and Christmas, and I inevitably like will say something and people look at me and go like, oh, that's the other Christian holiday, and I'm like, oh right, and I'm like, I know it sounds stupid, but it's weird. So yeah, so I find myself in these really awkward moments, and I find myself in awkward moments with people